So that nostalgia impulse for a lot of fundamentalists is go back to, and it's not just the fundamentalists, because a lot of the liberals want to go back to the economics of the 1940s and 50s, industrial economy, lunch bucket, quote unquote nuclear family, whatever. And as I read the Bible, God is always doing something
new. Yep. Behold,
right?
I make all things new.
Yes, and he's still doing that.
Right.
And if we fight it, we're in the way of it.
Well, we have another exciting program for you in store today. I'm David Gornoski here with my good friend Jerry Bowyer. It's been a while since we talked. I think it was around Christmas season. So here we are in summer. Christmas in July or whatever is upon us. So how you doing, Jerry?
I'm fine. A little warm, but fine otherwise.
Good. Now tell us a little bit about what you've been just right off the bat, what you've been working on, some of the things. You've got your program, Meeting of the Minds, right? The podcast. Anything else that you've been cooking up lately?
Well, yeah, my life right now is almost entirely about talking to companies, large publicly traded companies, about the way that they've gotten caught up in the conflicts in our nation, taking sides in a contentious social war under pressure from the left, and helping to encourage them to be free of that and to stick to their core function: sneakers, banking, software, oil, gas, whatever it is, to stick to their core function and not get embroiled in what we would understand as mimetic rivalries, which are it's worse than a zero-sum game, right? It's a negative-sum game.
Yeah.
For 40 years,
it's marketed as zero sum, but it ends up being a negative sum.
Yeah, zero-sum game would be the optimistic take on it, right? But once and I think they're kind of learning gradually. The left came along and pressured them, and they said, okay, we'll say the thing that you want us to say. We'll say we believe in gender equality.
Mm-hmm.
And then the left just comes back and says, okay, well, because you believe in gender equality, then you have to boycott pro-life states. Well, wait, we didn't sign up for that. Well, that's gender equality.
Yeah.
Or because you believe in gender equality, you have to make commitments that when you're out there doing lobbying or giving money to candidates, that you blacklist anybody who's against who's against abortion, or who's against trans rights, or who's against the Equal Rights Amendment or whatever. So, what these companies are finding is that they sort of they didn't know they were making a contract, an open-ended contract. And so they get pulled more and more into this. And by us showing up on the other side, so I represent basically institutional investors who want voting and engagement to be essentially the opposite of what has been coming out of the ESG world, environmental, social, governance investing, not to pull them to the right, but to free them from politics. So
how does DEI fit with ESG? Is DEI a part of ESG, or?
Yeah, DEI is part of the S. So you can kind of make that as a subsector of the S.
Is that the more vicious form of this religion, the DEI department, or is it all pretty virulent?
I think given the human penchant to racial animosity, it is playing with fire. So we'll fight over anything, right? Freud talked about the narcissism of small differences. I think Girard had a more insightful take on it, which is undifferentiation. So we'll fight the more we're alike. And so who's the victim race? Right now we have a fight over who's the victim race, right? So Israel, the Jews underwent a Holocaust by Adolf Hitler, which made them favored by the left because the left taps into a victim ideology, right? But if they start winning wars, then they can't be the victim anymore. So there's a new victim, and there's always a search for the new victim, right? So we went from George Floyd, and then we went on to LGBTQ issues and Palestinians. And I mean, I don't want to get pulled into who really is the real victim, because again, that's a negative sum game, right? That whole way of thinking, I think, is extremely dangerous. And DEI looks for protected classes. But like I said to the general counsel of Apple, being a disadvantaged minority group depends on, where you are. So maybe in Alabama, trans people are the disadvantaged minority group, or gay people are the disadvantaged minority group, but they sure aren't on the Apple campus, right? There, a Southern Baptist might be the disadvantaged minority group who worries about a pink slip. So there's this constant search for the victim. And so why do you choose a victim? You choose a victim so you can get the scapegoat mechanism off of you and onto somebody else. So your defense mechanism is to try to get somebody else killed. Now, as Gerard pointed out, we don't really kill people anymore. We just kill their reputations. And so we don't get the peace that came from paganism, which is we all get together, murder somebody, and then we say, well, he was a witch.
And even the ones who we do kill, the death penalty, wars, sanctions, all those different folks do not provide catharsis. They create great protests in the streets and anti-war movements and political dissent. So it doesn't.
Right, because we don't come together and say, well, they deserved it.
Yeah.
We come together.
They try.
Right.
They try to create Osama bin Laden as a scapegoat. They try to create Saddam Hussein, Assad, all these folks as a kind of charged figure
as a purification
that we can all tear into, but it never really works, does it?
Right. So, which of course is a completely different question.
Yeah.
Than what should be the foreign policy about Saddam Hussein or Osama bin Laden. And it's almost like we can't even talk about those things, because the moment we start to talk about them, we're caught up in scapegoating politics, right? Rather than, in this case.
Remember what the neocons used to shut down anti-war folks on the right. They would say, you're blame America first. That scapegoating language, see?
Right, that's right.
Blame America first.
Says none of the scapegoating ever works. What happens is each group tries to scapegoat the other, and it doesn't stick. Mm-hmm. So it just goes on and on. That was Gerard's view. And it'll go on, and it'll get worse and worse, and then eventually we'll kill each other. Yeah. So for him, it goes into apocalyptic violence. I don't see it that way. I think that the power of the Holy Spirit is such that we can step off. We can have an off ramp from this. Yeah. Anytime we want, and I think will. But so we're not fated to that apocalyptic violence. Yeah. That's why I don't know if we get into all the theology stuff, but the point I try to make with some Gerardians is I think that's why hermeneutics, which focus on first century fulfillment of the prophetic discourses of Jesus, destruction of the temple, for example, they give us a more open future. I mean, if you read like all of the Olivet discourse, wars and this generation will not pass away till all these things be fulfilled, and then there's a long list. And they say, well, that's not really this generation, that's some later generation, right? Even though Jesus said this generation, there's a whole long list of things that have to happen, and it'll be the worst tribulation in the history of the world. Well, if that's in our future, then we don't have an open future. We're fated.
Right.
But if the great trial of mankind was 30 AD to 70 AD, now we can opt out of apocalyptic violence. It's not fated. We have an open future.
Yeah, and something I've said too about, like, if you think about the Christ archetype in literature and film, the hero's journey, all these different forms of this that you see, every great novel, like Gerard pointed out, but also, every pop culture movie, all has this haunting of the cross, this haunting of a Christ archetype, this that we talk about character development. A good piece of work is one that has good character development. And to the extent that a piece of work does not have much character development, we consider it to be a flat piece of propaganda, garbage, not really interesting, not really profound.
Right.
And so whether it's high art or pop art, Christ archetypes abound. But in that hero's journey, there's always, it's so funny to me, the way in which Christians have conceived of Christ's actions in history, that his nonviolent, self-emptying mode, his self-giving, his forgiving of his enemies, that is the penultimate culmination in literature character development. When the character starts off kind of an ordinary, he's got a flaw, he's got ego, he's probably, he or she's got a temper, they've got a quick desire to get a vengeance against their enemies. And then they go through their belly of the well, or the facing of the dragon, and they have to confront their ego, right? Carl Jung talks about it, and they die to self. They let go of that, and that is the moment that the story has its resolution.
Right, Beowulf goes down into the lair.
Yeah. Lord of the Rings, all of it.
Right.
Avengers, remember Iron Man has to lay down his life for his friends because the battling isn't working. We're just battling to the end. It's not solving anything. He has to lay down his life.
Harry Potter needs to stumble through the woods.
Yep.
To save Hagrid from captivity to Voldemort.
Yep. Luke Skywalker lays down his life for his father to take, and then that's what moves his father to mimetically imitate that spirit of nonviolence. And he's a little bit violent because he throws the guy off, but he negates the cycle of domination that he's been enthralled into. That motion, right, is inverted by a lot of Christians' conception of history because they believe Christ starts off self-giving, that very penultimate thing that all humans are just whisked away when they put their Christ-haunted art and literature and film together. And yet they reverse that when the real Jesus shows up in history. Like, yeah, he's going to do all that self-giving, emptying, dying to self, forgiveness. And then when he comes back, he's just like every other pagan god. He's coming off the top rope with an elbow drop from heaven right onto all of his opponents, physically drenching the planet with blood. No, I think he shows up and the blood goes up halfway his garment because of all the things that we've done unto ourselves, maybe, even if you wanted to read that in that futuristic sense. I don't think that Jesus comes back with Rambo's spirit. I think that negates the entire purpose. But a lot of people can't handle the radical love and forgiveness that Christ requires of us. So they say, well, he was kind of doing it like a secret agent to trick Satan and his opponents. But that was merely to, they call it the role of the suffering servant. He comes back as the conquering king. I do believe Christ conquers, but I think he conquers through us in history using the same means that he defeats the powers on the cross, which is nonviolent dismantling of it, a kind of social Aikido. And I think they misread it when they're like, no, nothing really happens, because most people's eschatology, or even their view of church history, is almost one of defeatism, whether you're in the Catholic Church, Orthodox Church, Protestant Church. There's so much defeatism, and the only thing that happens is Jesus comes back and he just says, all right, all that other stuff I did was just a trick.
Right. Plan A, the cross was plan A. That didn't work. Now we're going to try plan B.
No more Mr. Nice Christ. That's the idea.
Right. And we do that. We do that. We try to imitize that eschaton, and we do it, by persecuting unbelievers or persecuting different kinds of believers in history.
Yeah. Let's get the show on the road. Let's show them what no more Mr. Nice Christ is going to be like. Let's give them a taste of that.
I think there's a kind of a problem here with people's understanding of the Trinity and the incarnation, in that there's almost a sense of, well, the Jesus in the Gospels is not like the Son in the Trinity.
Yeah.
In the Son, when he's the Son in the Trinity, all three persons of the Trinity are all about their glory.
Yeah.
Right. And then we're going to have this, we're going to change it up here, for 33 years. And then the Son will be humble. And then later we're going to go back to the Son being all about his glory. And so in theology, they have something called the ontological Trinity, which is how the Trinity is among themselves. And then the economic Trinity, which is how the Trinity, works together to accomplish the redemption of mankind. And to the degree that we're pushing that contrast too much, I think we don't see what Jesus says: if you've seen me, you've seen the Father.
Yeah.
Now, is he just saying, if you've seen me, you've seen what the Father's like right now?
No.
Or is he saying the closest look you're ever going to get to how the Father is by looking at me?
Yeah.
And he's humble and he's washing feet. So, I'm more interested. This is kind of a boogeyman, the social Trinity, but I'm very interested in this idea that you've got three persons who love each other and treat the other as more important than they are. And you definitely see this in the Gospels. The Father says, hey, I'm the Father, listen to me. No, he doesn't. He said, you are my beloved Son. in you I am well pleased at the baptism. And then in the Mount of Transfiguration, he says it to others. He tells Jesus' friends, this is my beloved son. Listen to him. So the Father seems to be really focused on the Son. And the Son says, well, you want to see the Father, you see the Father through me, and Abba Father. And he teaches them, he doesn't teach them to pray to Jesus. Jesus never tells them to pray to Jesus.
Yeah.
He teaches them to pray to the Father. And then Jesus says, it'll be good for you if I leave, because if I don't leave, then the Spirit can't come. So Jesus is implying that the Spirit is better for them than the Son. So what does the Spirit do? Come and say, hey, I'm here, things are finally okay? No, the Spirit comes, and he's the Spirit of Jesus, and no one can say Jesus is Lord but by the Spirit. So the Spirit is saying Jesus, and the Spirit is the Spirit who teaches us to say Abba, Father. So it's like they're all reflecting glory onto the other, and that seems to be who they are forever.
Right.
In their nature.
Why would they change their whole entire disposition it just takes basic kind of literary analysis to see what is the intention of the author with these different depictions of this. If this is a divinely inspired author and it's depicting divinity, what's the intention? You should just look at the thrust of and this is the problem with conservatives. They have no appreciation. And I don't want to say these broad brushes, but it's true. They just really don't like the literary analysis approach about things. They don't want to think about things in a way that, it's like Gerard said, they don't want to see the connections to myth with the gospel, but that's precisely how how supernatural and beautiful and divine the gospels really are in distinction from myth. And they don't want to, in some ways, in the same vein, use just basic literary analysis techniques.
Well, yeah, because
it doesn't deny the literal reality of the events that unfold, but rather just shows you what is the purpose of the author in describing these things. Is it
theological conservatives are in a mimetic rivalry with theological liberals?
Yeah.
So you can't say anything that sounds like something a liberal would say.
Right.
Or with the liberals, you can't say anything that makes you sound like a fundamentalist.
Right. Yeah.
And so they're just trapped, in this like eternal war with one another, where they can't see the text anymore in many cases. Now, some do. I mean, there are great exegetes out there, and some of them are more conservative and some are more liberal. So that's why I try to avoid the abstractions. I try just get me to the details of the text, and let's work through it in historical detail, in the language, to free. That is a discipline partly to free ourselves from the mimetic rivalry of you can't say that because it sounds like something the liberals would say, or you can't say that because it sounds like something fundamentalists would say.
Yeah, it's true. But so
Gerard was clear about this. We can't talk. If you're a conservative, you feel like you can't talk about parallels between mythology and the Gospels because that was a weapon. The Fraser and the anthropological community, they use that as a weapon against Christianity. Jesus is just another corn god. Jesus is just another Osiris. Jesus is just another Bacchus, Dionysus, right? And therefore, we can write him off, just another Mithras mystery cult coming into Rome. But Jesus quotes Dionysus. Jesus noticed it. So we should pay attention to it as well. But we don't have to be afraid of that. We don't have to be afraid of reading the Gospels carefully and letting them say whatever they want to say.
Yeah. And to me, it seems that the text indicates that, and history bears witness to this, that there's not just this individual theosis that we're called to become like God, but rather that humanity and history itself is experiencing a kind of theosis. And that scares, again, a lot of traditionalist types away because everybody wants to rewind history and pick their favorite period where they felt like the church got it right and just stop and try to emulate that, which is a very pagan move going back.
I see that over and over again. Like right now in sort of the world of Presbyterianism, everyone wants to go back to the quote magisterial Reformation. They call it ressourcement. So they want to go back to a period after the Reformers where there was a lot of like scholastic like super distinction in metaphysical decision and a hyper focus on nationalism. And that also included persecution of Catholics or non-believers. That's their golden age, right? Or for some, they want to, like some Baptists, you'll see that in their title on social media, 1689, they want to go back to the London Confession. Or some people want to go back to the Westminster Confession of Faith. And then you have all these trad cats who want to go back to the, the Council of Trent. They want to, everything after everything that Vatican II ruined everything. We got to go back to Vatican I. Or, oh no, Vatican I ruined everything, right? And then we go back to the Council of Trent. What we really need is a tridentine Latin Mass. And if you have to do whatever it takes to get to a tridentine Latin Mass, and then everything will be okay. And make sure to rhetorically burn down the house of everyone who isn't doing a tridentine Latin Mass. A Latin Novus Ordo isn't good enough. You got to do that. And some people, you got to go back to Eastern Orthodoxy because that's the patristics. And that's the golden age. And if we just get back to there, everything will be okay. Everyone chooses some backwards point in history.
Even the Anabaptists and these people that trace back to the Anabaptist utopias throughout history, or the Hebrew roots movement, the Hebrew roots movement.
The New Testament church was kind of Anabaptist, so they're going to go back to primitive Christianity, but they've never read the Didache, which shows that second generation Christianity looks really liturgical, right?
Yeah.
Has a high view of the Eucharist and all the rest of it, so they don't know that. So then a whole bunch of those folks started to read the early church, and a lot of them became Eastern Orthodox, right? Yeah. And that's fine. They want to become Eastern Orthodox or whatever you want to become, as long as you're within Christ. I'm not going to, pick a fight with you. But what I'm going to pick a fight with is the quest for the golden age moment.
Right. That's a pagan mentality. That's not a Christ mentality. Yeah.
That's right. I mean, literally, that was pagan mythology. You have a golden age, you have a silver age, you have a bronze age, you have an iron age, and then maybe we'll cycle back to the golden age. And I think Christianity is an eschatological religion. Yeah. It's about the future. And like even with fundamentalism, Jerry Falwell used to call his show the old time gospel hour. Right. So I remember once I was guest hosting on a radio program, and I said, what in American history, what would you go back to? Like if you could go back, no, I didn't say it that way. If you could live in any time in American history, when would you live? And almost everyone said the 1940s and 50s. And I said, okay, that's great. Stop one of them. I said, now imagine you're black. Do you still want to go back to the 1940s or 50s? He said, I never thought of it that way. Mm-hmm. Right. So that nostalgia impulse for a lot of fundamentalists is go back to, and it's not just the fundamentalists, because a lot of the liberals want to go back to the economics of the 1940s and 50s, industrial economy, lunch bucket, quote unquote nuclear family, whatever. And as I read the Bible, God is always doing something
new. Yep. Behold, right? I make all things new.
Yes, and he's still doing that.
Right.
And if we fight it, we're in the way of it. And it's going to happen. It's like in Star Trek, the Genesis torpedo, where they shoot this thing at a planet that's dead and life comes. But if there's something already alive there on the planet, well, too bad. Something new is coming.
Yeah.
So in some sense, the gospel is a life torpedo that's coming to us, but we can align with it. We can align, and Jesus offered that. He's saying, look, I'm kind of, obviously paraphrasing here. Look, you can pick a fight with a superpower called Rome, but what's going to happen is you're going to get killed, just like those people who had their blood mixed with, with the sacrifice, or had the Tower of Siloam fall over on them. Yeah. Because that's so. Or you can get with the new program, and if you get with the new program, you're not going to pick a fight with Rome. You're going to avoid the confrontation with Rome, and you'll survive. Right. And as history moves forward, if we're against his purpose in history, we might be personally saved, right, as an ember pulled from the fire. But if he has a purpose in history and that's moving forward, and we're in the way of that, then it's not going to go well for us.
I think to the extent that Peter Thiel is right, that we have not innovated in the world of atoms, is to the extent that we have long sown the fruits of a Gnostic disposition towards Christianity, right? This kind of disembodied Christ, that's an ideological thing that I mentally assent to, and then I wield it as a kind of cudgel against my theological rivals within the church, as well as, my opponents across the cultural divide. And that becomes people's means of using Christianity. It's a talisman that they take in the back of their car when they're on their trip. It's not actually something that you embody, that you become, that you walk on water like Christ. You don't really, God forbid, you really take the do not resist evil with violence seriously, because now you're just being quaint and silly. And I hate that, because it's such a missed opportunity. I think that's why Girard's work is important, because it helps it kind of dislodges from this slumber, this theology only of Christ, creates a disembodied, dualistic at best, or Gnostic at worst, type of Christianity that is no earthly good. And therefore, we don't dream big anymore. Christians should be on the forefront of creating new physics, because physics is in a doldrums right now. It doesn't know how to get out of its cul-de-sac. It's stuck.
Right.
String
Standard
theory
model is
yeah.
coming under attack, but there's
Yeah,
no.
and then and where are the Christians in this conversation? Well, I mean, you don't
We're
see
afraid
it.
of it because
Yeah,
it's theirs, and we're afraid of AI because it's theirs, and we're
yeah,
afraid of blockchain because it's. Although
yeah, and we don't, and we dare not
many
say.
Christians have been more adoptive of blockchain, but
Yeah,
older Christians, oh, it's the Antichrist money or something like
yeah,
that.
and we dare not say, like, let's create anti-gravity, because that would make us look weird and kooky and creepy, and only the New World Order or aliens could ever create anti-gravity. So don't even try, because those are bad guys. And if aliens show up, they must be demons. So dumb. I mean, this is exactly what pagans would do. If an alien showed up in their community that looked different, they'd ritually sacrifice it as a demon. And here we are as Christians, knee-jerk reaction. If it's got different skin than us, it must be a demon. That's what these aliens are. Number two, if you try to do anti-gravity, it means you're in bed with Klaus Schwab's and World Economic Forum types.
Yeah,
you can't have cures of cancer unless you've made a deal with the devil. You can't have cures of diet. Nothing. There's no atomistic innovation because.
There's an article, periodical I write for sometimes, that did an op-ed against Elon Musk and the use of interface technology, digital interface technology with the human brain, because that's cyborgs or something. I mean, it's so much. If God meant man to fly, he would have been created with wings. I've got a pacemaker. I'm a cyborg.
Yeah.
It made my life a whole lot better. There are paralyzed people who aren't as paralyzed now, because of that. So, I mean, we really need to recover a biblical theology, because a biblical theology will be technologically accelerationist.
Right.
And it will be not just electrons, it'll be protons and neutrons, the heavy stuff.
Right.
I mean, the command given to mankind was fill the earth and subdue it.
Yeah.
That is industrial. It is agricultural. It's mining. Yeah. It's I mean, and the first example project is God looks and he says, well, there's not yet a man to irrigate the ground, so I'm going to have a mist here for a while until there's a man to irrigate the ground. And then we get a description about the 4 rivers that go out of Eden, which seems so strange. Like, why is that there? Like, why are we suddenly doing like a travelogue of the rivers of Eden? Because God just said there's not a man to irrigate the ground. And so in the land of Eden, so now God is doing the example project. I'm going to create rivers to show man how you irrigate the ground. Part of the command of God is hydraulic engineering, right? God does hydraulic he says we don't have a hydraulic engineer. Here, I'm going to do hydraulic engineering.
Yeah.
And I'm going to put the man in there and he can see what I did. But that stuff, we're supposed to be restored to that. And I don't know anybody almost nobody. Well, Peter Thiel is thinking this way in terms of acceleration, but I don't know anyone in theology world. I mean, it's fascinating. I just read N.T. Wright's new commentary on Romans 8, and he makes a great argument that, that being conformed to the image of the Son and the glory of God, and, it's climaxed in Romans chapter 8, is about us taking on our Adamic function. Yeah. That glory means to go back to the function of Adam, which means ruling over the earth, right?
Yep.
It's like, that's great. And immediately, what does he go to? Global warming. It means we need to stop global warming. It's like, oh my gosh, you're going to Greta for this?
Yeah. That's the kind of Gnostic perimeters by which even the best theologians get trapped under, right? Because they can't dare really look at the earth with wonder. It's got to be mediated through these really cynical institutions that have really dim views about abundant energy, that it has to come through wind or solar, which are just oligarchic dreams. I mean, I call that fake green energy. The Christians would provide really robust energy, too cheap to meter. And that means thinking outside the box beyond what the textbook or the subsidies or the grants or the TED Talk worlds would tell you are possible, right? You have to have the hermeneutic of suspicion. That means you have to be willing to look really, really weird for a time. You have to look like Noah. You're going to have to look like Nikola Tesla. That's why he wore really nice suits, because he knew the crowd would tear him
Oh, he
apart
was
if he,
crazy. Yeah,
you know
right.
what I mean? He was immaculately dressed. That's called scapegoat protection. You know,
Right, 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 right. Yeah, so the biblical mandate is to fill the earth and subdue it. And the only time Christians talk about the material world at all anymore now is, oh, don't fill and subdue it too much.
yeah, because we're getting out of here
Uh,
soon.
it's all about the things that go wrong. And
Yeah,
yeah, pollution can be an issue, but that's a corrective of a good thing, right? And we don't live to 35 now, we live to 85 because we decided to fill the earth and subdue it. And we had this great takeoff over 300 years. And now we have no progress. And that's what Peter is lamenting. My point is, we're not going to get technological progress until we have a theology, until we get back to a biblical theology that gives us permission,
yeah.
even commands us to spend 6 out of 7 days filling the earth and subduing
Yeah.
it.
The way I put it is we need a biblical anthropology to balance our theology, to get it grounded back into the world of atoms again. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah, right.
the theology alone without an anthropology is only one part of the equation, that Jesus is both God. He is the fullest picture of what God is like. If you only have that when you read the Bible, I'm going to open up this book and it's going to be telling me about what God is like. If that's where you start with that premise, you are not going to be able to understand and think like Christ. It's only when you see this and say, this will not only tell me what God is like, it'll tell me what mankind is like. It'll tell me why I have conflicts, why I'm prone to groupthink, why I'm not able to get out of these perpetual rivalries that hold me back, and why humanity can't have progress when it's caught up deifying its neighbors or scapegoating its misfits. This is going to give you the blueprint, and it has given humanity the blueprint. You
Right.
know,
Yeah. I love what Gerard said, that we didn't stop burning witches because we discovered science. We discovered science because we stopped burning witches.
right?
So societies that don't have forgiveness and atonement mechanisms, and therefore have to turn to superstitious versions of that,
Right.
will not have technological progress.
Right.
The only science you can afford to put that kind of time and energy into is the science of not being the one killed, instead being the one
Right.
doing the killing.
Exactly.
That's your
Exactly.
survival mechanism.
That's what governments in third world countries are barely hanging on to, keeping the mob at bay.
That's right.
Right.
And that has to be, you don't have time to think about what you're thinking about is, am I going to get killed this week?
Yeah.
And the scapegoat mechanism says, well, there's a way for you not to get killed this week. That is to get the mob to kill somebody else.
Right.
And that's the coping mechanism. But when the gospel does away with that, all of a sudden look out at the world, and you look at the sky, and you look at the ground, and you look at the cyclotrons, and you start looking at things, you get curious about the world.
And
right?
now you're actually doing what you were supposed to do, recreation. Now you're
Precisely.
actually participating in your actual, because that's the thing that, again, that I have an issue, and I have to keep saying this because I love all the people turning to faith right now, but I want them to not get stuck in it for the wrong reasons, because then they'll be making a faith of their own image, not a faith of Christ, which is the purpose of if you follow these old traditions, you're becoming part of you're tired of the smoke and mirrors and the friendship cards at church and the donuts and the coffee and the jumbotrons. I get it. So you want to go to a more ancient faith, but do so with the love of Christ and the imitation of Christ anchoring while you're doing it, because otherwise you're going to miss out on what you're actually called to do, which is not to hide in your prayer closet perpetually repenting, but to repent so that you can create. You can't create without repenting. Your purpose. I had somebody, one time, just to show you, lots of these young men are coming to ancient forms of faith, and somebody said, David's talking about this new breakthrough that could cure cancer. What's the purpose of that? We're going to die of something anyways. We need to get holy. And I said, oh, that's the problem.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of anti-longevity and
Yeah.
anti-health culture
Yeah.
in the church. I remember reading a blog someone wrote at the Theopolis Institute, which is a good group, and this guy was writing basically a pro-fitness blog. But there was 2 paragraphs of, now I know that some people make an idol of it, and I know that godliness is no more important, and I know that of all we're going to eventually, like, he had to put up all the protections
Qualifications.
before he came out and said, hey, it's a good thing to watch your diet and maybe lift some weights and, and get in shape. I mean, that shouldn't be a controversial thing to say.
Yeah.
But if you're in mimetic rivalry for who's most holy, that usually turns into a mimetic rivalry for who's most aversive
Right.
to excellence in other areas. So you prove you're holy by not being very good at your job,
Right.
or you prove you're holy by not going to the gym, like those people who just worship their bodies, or you prove you're holy by being stupid, right?
Yeah.
Holiness is stupidity. I remember I had an experience once in social media. It was fascinating. There's a friend of mine who was becoming a monk at the time, and we were sort of worshiping together, like just kind of almost like back and forth with comments on Facebook. And we were doing it in Latin, right? And I did that to honor his Catholicism. And somebody came in from the non-denominational world, actually somebody who works for Christian TV, and said, "Come on, guys, keep it real." And I saw what that meant. That meant dumb it down. Now, see, I wasn't in the pulpit preaching in Latin. I wasn't on Christian TV. I understand that there's an appropriateness, but for him, Latin was part of his devotional life, and we were worshiping, and we were scolded for that.
Yeah.
It wasn't an evangelistic outreach. I wasn't on the street corner. We were
Yeah.
scolded for that. And so the message was sent. If it's intellectual or intellectually challenging, it is spiritually suspicious.
Right.
I remember Jim Sire once asked me, the guy who wrote the Worldview Next Door, he said one of the breakthrough questions for him was when he asked, "Is Jesus smart?"
Yeah.
And he concluded that Jesus was smart. Now, I don't think Jesus had to be smart. I think he could have been the Messiah and not been smart. But I don't think anyone can read the Gospels and incredible insights without concluding that Jesus was smart. And if he's smart, then it's okay to be smart. That doesn't mean you have to be smart to be holy, but it also doesn't mean you have to be stupid to be holy, right? What holy means is whatever your intellectual level, you love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, right? Which if somebody has 160 IQ, then they're loving God with 160 IQ. And if someone's got a 60 IQ, they're loving God with all
That's
60.
part of the talents, isn't it? The whole talents.
Yes, exactly. And and all of it is a war against excellence. And the whole war against excellence is a mimetic rivalry between churchy holiness and excellence in other areas.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. 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 I mean, that's the thing. I'm trying to get folks to see when you hear Pavarotti sing Nessun Dorma, that feeling you get, you shouldn't feel like, I'm so tired of religion being juxtaposed as this kind of like opposite of that. Like, oh, that's earthly, worldly delights. Don't be too proud of that. No, that stirring in your spirit when he hits that high note.
Right.
God loves that.
Right.
He wants you to feel that. It's not like a side issue, like, it's a little dirty pleasure of yours, to feel that excitement. That's ego,
from Chronicle that Israel had a famous choirs. People would come from around the world for the choir in the temple.
Yeah.
And even when Israel went into captivity, what did they say? Sing us a song. Sing us a song of your land.
Because they were known
Why
for
are they
that.
saying that? Because they were known for their beautiful music.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the temple could become an idol, and it did. And music can become an idol. It's interesting. Augustine says in De Musica, he speaks in favor of beautiful music, but he says, but of course, that's not the main point. And he's right. So the beauty can compete with truth and holiness, but it's not inherently in competition with truth and holiness. And I think I've seen that to some degree in sort of elite Protestant circles. I mean, there's churches that have unbelievable choral music programs. And it just completely prostituted themselves to progressive political causes, but they've got really beautiful music and they're proud of their aesthetic superiority, right? And I will take a faithful church singing the goofiest ditty praise chorus over people who've given themselves over to leftist communist ideology. But I'd kind of like both. I think God's word and the Psalms and the liturgy actually deserve really beautiful music. Sometimes you have to make that choice, but it's not an inherent choice.
Yeah. Well, I want to get to this. The reason we wanted to gather together, I want you to explain. You have a very, practical way of explaining the whole concept of taking the speck out of your eye that Jesus talks about. And it all kind of fits with like a glove with what we've been building here, kind of talking and discussing the state of the church and where we're at and redemptive history, the anthropological undercurrents about what's happening here. So I thought, one of the big problems that holds, I think, Christianity back is, excuse me, not Christianity. One of the things that I think holds the West back is its kind of obsession with a mutated form of this. Don't judge the speck in your brother's eye when you have a plank in yours, is the kind of image that we typically boil it down to. And I think that the worst forms of leftist type political correctness and multiculturalism in an authoritarian sense is a mutation of this very concept, wherein, I shall never say anything good about my culture or my locality or my own native race, lest I look like I am, I should never say anything critical about any other group. Islam gets a pass if it's acting crazy, all these things get a pass, lest I never step on my brother's shoes. This kind of radicalization turns this into a self-harm concept in our society. And,
Right.
and a lot of these young people who are into Nietzsche, the microwave Nietzsche that you hear on Twitter from these folks, the anonymous
Bondage
accounts.
pervert
Yeah, the
types.
tough guys with anonymous accounts.
Yes,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Right. The guys who call everyone else a coward
yeah,
behind their
yeah,
bad Latin
yeah.
numb plumes. Yes.
Yeah. So those guys, they're really pushing that. They're really trying to scratch this itch that people are feeling like, this Christianity stuff's kind of part of the reason why the West is so garbage today, guys. Sorry. Well, let's address this, because let's go into this. So I have the ESV Matthew chapter 7. It says, "Judge not." I'll just read a little bit before the key passage. "Judge not that you be judged, that you be not judged, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is the log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye."
Yeah. So what I don't want to do is talk about how the liberals are misusing this, right? Because then we get caught up in that mimetic rivalry with them, right? So, I mean, definitely the left does something with this, which is don't be judgmental, but of course then becomes incredibly judgmental if you eat meat, or whatever, or if you don't, or if you walk on the flag or if you drive your scooter over the pride flag, that's painted on the road or something like that, right? So everyone's judging all the time.
Well, yeah. Let me correct it. I don't want to talk about the left, but we are in a fundamentally revolutionary, liberal type culture in the West that is predicated on a mutation of these types of verses. So that's
Yes,
what I
and
meant to say.
absolutely true.
Yeah.
And then we have a reaction to it,
Right.
which is all judgy all the time,
Right. Sure.
right?
That's a false dialectic. We don't want
It
either.
really is. And so what I always try to do is just go back to the text and like just throw all that aside. And where I wrote a book about Jesus and economics,
Yeah.
and people think I wrote it to prove that Jesus wasn't a socialist, but I
Right.
didn't write it to prove Jesus wasn't a socialist. Now, I don't think Jesus was a socialist, and I think that my book makes it pretty impossible for an open-minded person to believe that Jesus was a socialist. But instead, I was interested in just letting the text speak, not in shutting the mouth of the left,
Right.
right? So as I'm looking at this, I mean, there's a couple of things that really jump out, which is that we have this statement not to judge, but that's not a standalone. Don't judge, or you too will be judged. So there's a prudential modification here. The reason not to judge is because you'll be judged. What does he mean? Well, however you judge people, then you'll be measured that same way. You are creating a standard when you judge. And whatever standard you create when you do that will then be used against you.
How would you define the word judge as it's used here? I mean, you don't have to.
Evaluated.
Discernment,
Yes. Not
discern,
not inherently adversely judged, but evaluate.
discriminate is
Yeah, yes. So not judge being, I'm saying you're bad, but basically I'm evaluating. So when you're evaluating, I think this is saying evaluate in a way that takes into account the fact that your system of evaluation will then be applied to you.
So why doesn't he just say, be careful when you judge because it's going to come back on you? Why does he say do not? Sounds like, you could easily, if just reading the English, you'd say, okay, well, don't do it.
Yeah, well, I think the Sermon on the Mount is, the whole thing is kind of like that. The
Mm-hmm.
Sermon on the Mount is like very prophetically edged, right? So language about hating your father and your mother, etc. There's a certain kind
Hyperbole.
of literary style
Okay.
here, which I think people would understand. I don't think that people said, "Oh, I guess I have to go home and say, Mom, you're ugly, and you're fat, and
Yeah.
Dad, you're an idiot,
Yeah.
and I hate you." I think there's an understanding of what's really being said here, and
So he
one of
uses this extreme language to shock the audience out of its normal consideration kind of thing, right?
yes, and it's not unusual to use this kind of language.
Yeah.
He's speaking in a genre of the time.
Yeah.
Might not be one we're used to, but actually we do it all the time.
Yeah.
We speak in hyperbole. I almost said constantly, but we don't speak in hyperbole constantly. But I just said it hyperbolically. So everybody always does this. It is human nature to talk this way, but we don't allow Jesus to talk that way. We have to kind of take it and say, all right, well, let's put it under a microscope.
Yeah.
And just like we're going to put a word under a microscope or a phrase rather than there's a flow here.
Right.
Right. So he's saying, don't judge because you'll be judged the same way. And there will be a measure that you use, and that measure will be used against you. And then he has an explanatory parable about a speck of sawdust.
Right.
And then he has another explanatory parable about giving dogs something that's sacred. And then he goes on and gives an instruction about asking what you want from God and seeking, and the door will be open to you. And I'm not sure that other than in a commentary of actual like literal scholarly commentary, I'm not sure I have ever heard anyone talk about do not judge or you too will be. I've ever heard anyone talk about Matthew 7:1 and 2, and then go on to put it in the context of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? Mm-hmm. But it's a literary unit. And it's to be read that way. It's not to be read one verse at a time. So here's what we have right now is liberals quote Matthew 7:1 and conservatives quote Matthew 7:2. Liberals quote, do not judge or you be judged. And then conservatives kind of quote, yeah, but they're kind of, it's really about hypocrisy, right? Not about judging. As opposed to just letting the thing wash over you. And to me, why is Jesus giving a parable about this? Well, to help us understand it. So what we do is we reduce the parable down to, what did that New York Times reporter went after George Bush. George Bush was asked about homosexuality, and he said, well, I'm not going to look at the speck in somebody else's eye, with a log in my own eye. And I can't remember the New York Times reporter's name. Frank Bruni said, what a strange expression. What a strange way to say that's the pot calling the kettle black. And it's like, wow, that's so revelatory. You don't know that's from the Bible? He's not winging it. But George W. Bush was basically using it to say, don't be judgmental, but there's detail here. So if I'm looking, so let's say I'm going after your speck, right? And I'm looking to take the speck of sawdust out of your eye. So I'm in here now.
Yeah.
And what am I seeing?
Yeah.
I'm seeing your eye. What do you see?
Literally, and by the way, I remember I literally had this happen to me one time. I had a piece of wood stuck in my eye, and I had to have a doctor, and he had to go in there. I remember that was the most scary thing because he's putting this little sharp thing in my eye, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like an old school doctor.
Yeah.
Just picking them out. picking that thing out.
Yeah, I had the same thing when I was in college. I walked by a construction zone, a little fleck of something got in there, and they had to go in there. So he's in close.
Yeah.
If the doctor has bad breath, you know it, or if you have so.
Yeah.
Remember, well, let's not be Gnostic about this. Jesus worked as a carpenter. He would have seen specks of sawdust in eyes.
Yeah.
He would have gotten specks of sawdust in his eye. He would have taken specks of sawdust. Joseph would have said, Yeshua, come here. Help me get this sawdust out of my eye. So this would have been to us, this is words. To him, it would have been a lived reality. So if I'm looking at your eyes. So a couple things are going on. One, Jesus is not saying if you think your neighbor or your brother has a club foot, well, then make sure you don't have a club foot. Or he's not saying if your neighbor has a cleft palate, make sure you don't have. Or if your neighbor is bald, make sure that you don't say anything about it because you're bald. Or if you're, he uses one specific organ. The organ of perception, which is well established in the Bible over and over again in Genesis chapter 1, Vayar Elohim Kitov. God saw that it was good. God saw that it was good. The eyes of the Lord go to and fro over the nations, judging, right? So eyes and judgment and sight in the Bible is a very well-established typological literary reference to judging. So if I think there's something wrong with my brother's eye, I think there's something wrong with the way he looks at the world. You see?
Yeah.
Okay. So what
because
do
that's
I
how
do?
that's how I knew I had something wrong, and I had a speck in my eyes because it was irritating my vision. It was distorting my vision.
You couldn't see rightly.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And so the doc went in and got that. So if I'm trying to pull the speck out of your eye, I think you don't see things rightly.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I'm in there close, the thing that you're seeing is me. So what is it that I think you're not seeing rightly? I think you're not seeing me rightly. When we have social conflicts, we are thinking that our brother is not judging correctly, isn't seeing things rightly, and specifically, they're not seeing me rightly. How many times have you had an argument where you say something to somebody and you're not saying anything about them at all? You're just making a point, and they say, oh, you think I'm stupid.
Yeah.
What? No, I don't think you're stupid. If I thought you're stupid, I wouldn't be talking to you, But if I tell them something they didn't know before, that reads as I think they're stupid. See, I think they think I'm not seeing them rightly, and they have to fix that in me, right? So if I'm in there closely, I think that you're not seeing something rightly. What are you not seeing rightly? Me. Okay.
Yeah.
So if I look really closely, what do I see in your eye?
Yeah.
I see me. You might try this in front of a mirror.
Yeah. Yeah. Look at the
right because the retina is reflective. So I only do this with my wife. I don't do it with anybody else. But if I look really closely into her eyes, which I like doing, but if I look really closely into her eyes, I see a little reflection of me. Right. Well, if she's got a mote in her eye, I see a distorted reflection of me. I see me through her eyes, and I don't like it. Right. If she's got a mote, so I have to fix her to make her see me rightly. And but I'm blind. What's the plank in my eye? I know this is getting kind of meta, but just bear with me. This is going to change a lot of things for those who are following along. I would argue that the plank in my eye is the magnified speck in my brother's eye. In other words, he's got a speck. I'm obsessed with his speck. I'm obsessed with how he judges things. I'm obsessed specifically with how he views me. I am obsessed with his distorted perception of me. I'm so obsessed that what he thinks about me is now a plank. I can't see anything but my problem with the way he sees me. And welcome to America in social media in the year of our Lord 2024. We think the other person is seeing things wrongly. We think the thing that they're seeing wrongly is us. And we become so obsessed with fixing that.
Yeah.
That their minor distortion in the way they look at us becomes so obsessed that it's the only thing we can see. So if the liberals say that some Trump supporters are deplorables, we are enraged by that.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It is a terrible thing to say,
Yeah.
right? Or if Christians say, or conservatives say something like, Mexican is, if we say something about the left, that the elites are godless, and evil, they are totally enraged and obsessed with us. They watch documentaries about Christian nationalism. They act like January 6th was like, 50 million people rather than 50 people, in the Capitol building. All they can see is our attack on them and our hatred of them. So somebody says, hey, maybe somebody, who's 15 years old shouldn't get castrated because they have a mood disorder. You hate me. You want to kill me. You want to destroy me. And all they can think about is how much they want to, how much we allegedly want to kill them. And then one of them, we found out recently in Nashville, went and killed a bunch of Christians at a Christian school because she thought that we wanted to kill her, because we get obsessed with the way the others, we think the other side hates us more than they do. And that's the only thing we can see about them.
Mhm.
And Jesus is saying something pretty simple, which is, you can't, that won't work. You have to stop looking at your brother. The only fix here is you turn away from that. You disengage from that, which is what Gerard basically says to do from mimetic rivalry. And then what do you have to do? If you want to take the speck out of your eye, what do you have to do? If you didn't have that doctor, what would you have done, David?
Yeah, look in the mirror.
There it is. You have to look in the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll see what's in your eye. And then after that, you can go fix it. So this is not a never judge. This is a get fixed. And then once you're oriented that way, you can actually help your brother get that speck out, right? You're not obsessed with them. You don't hate them. You don't think they hate you overly so. You're like, to use the language from David Friedman, failure of nerve, systems theory and behavioral. You are detached. You're different, or Gerard's language, you're differentiated. You're not entangled in how you think they see you.
Right.
Only then can you actually help them get the speck out of it.
Right.
And then Jesus goes on, he tells this parable about, don't give to the dogs things that are sacred. Don't give pearls to swine. If you do, they may trample them under feet and turn and tear you to pieces. So that's the other side of this. When you judge people, you're giving them a standard to use to judge you. That's what 7:1 and 2 say. Well, 7:6 is just the completion of that. Once you do that, it's like giving pearls to swine.
And he says, "You hypocrite." First, though, that's that political language, right? That they would have. Can you unpack that briefly?
Right.
Yeah.
Under criticism, which is a point that Gerard makes. We're trying to avoid being scapegoated. You're a play actor, right? So
you play actor. First, take the plank out of your own eye. So what's he's saying? You're fake, right?
You're fake. You're fronting it. We might say kayfabe or LARPing.
That's a little too close to home, but
I think you know what you're doing. You're like satirizing you're exposing the kayfabing, right? So I'm not that innocent, right? So you kayfabers first get the plank out of your own eye, but then so then he comes back in 6. I think these are all. I mean, these aren't randomly here. Jesus is giving a speech. He organized it well. So let's say you don't do that. Well, that's like giving pearls to pigs. And what's going to happen is they're going to get angry and they're going to kill you.
What do you think he had in mind when he said, "Do not give dogs what is sacred"? What does that mean?
I think he had in mind exactly this: do not give the world a standard that will be used to measure and destroy you and judge you. When you go out there into the world, evaluating people with your plank and your distorted view, you give them a weapon to use against you, and eventually that weapon, mimetic contagion, leads to the crowd becomes like feral boars,
okay,
and they tear you to pieces.
Okay, but here's immediate thing that comes back to me. I recently posted, humanity is so afraid of making mistakes, but the worst mistake we ever made was killing Jesus on the cross, and God turned that into our greatest victory. So what do you have to lose? And I think, what about the way people would hear what you're saying, the wisdom here, and take the more conservative approach of, well, I don't want to do any make mistakes now because look what he's saying. I mean, You try to
I
give
don't want
someone
to
some really good stuff, and it's all going to be coming
Yeah,
back
see,
on you, and the whole thing's going to fall apart. So why
yeah,
try to
this is
be
what
big?
happens when we abstract it. There's a specific mistake that he's telling us not to make.
Mhm.
The mistake of having our distorted, rivalrous view of our brother become an obsession, which stops us from seeing clearly.
Mhm.
And then using that standard. What is that standard? The standard is I'm going to evaluate you with no benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Right? That's what it is. If you
Bad
dislike me,
faith, if you want to.
it's absolutely, it's bad faith. So maybe you don't, I mean, if there's, let's say there's really a speck there, Jesus is acting like there's really a speck. They've got a problem. But they don't want to kill me. I mean, there's a few who do. There's a few mass murderers out there,
Mhm.
but for the most part, they're not. And if I'm setting down the bad faith standard of judgment because I'm obsessed with their flawed views,
Yeah.
then I am creating something that will be contagious, and eventually that mob will come for me.
Mhm.
You know, so what happens if you throw pearls to, why would throwing pearls to pigs get you killed? Because it looks like food, but it isn't food,
Yeah. So they're still
right?
hungry.
So what if you threw pearls in front of pigs? What do you think the pigs would think? They think they're getting corn,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Pearls, like, look, yeah. I mean, if there's someone who has a pig farm, now Jesus wouldn't have been around this that much, but you know, there were a lot of Gentiles in Galilee, so he would have been exposed to it. If somebody's going out to pig, what are they doing? They're throwing corn, or maybe not maize, but something like that, to pigs. The little pearls of something, right? They even call sometimes the heads of grain are pearls. You throw that to pigs, and it's like, oh, they're happy as pigs in slop, literally. But if you throw down pearls, it's useless to them, right? The correction that you offer to somebody when your vision is distorted is useless to them. All it does is make them hungry for
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
And what they're going to do is they're going to be hungry for you.
Isn't that kind of like the law provoking you to sin too? When you push too hard the law of death, it provokes that hunger of I want to be more sinful mimetically in dialectic relation to you putting this condemnation on me, kind of thing.
Yeah, there's two things with the law. One of them is where transgressions are multiplied, sins multiply. So the prohibition makes you like want to rebel against it. I think the other thing that's going on is the law then becomes a differentiator that makes you feel like you're better than everybody else. I think Paul is doing both in different epistles.
But it kind
So
of feels like what that sounds like there, where pigs are hungry, the more you're throwing them stuff that they can't utilize, and it provokes this kind of aggression, you know, this kind of push-pull aggression of mimesis.
right, it's not food to them,
Yeah.
but it looks like food to them.
Is that
So
another way of saying, could you look at that on an intellectual level? Don't speak over people or don't speak down to people. Don't patronize, you know, or no, I mean, you know, does that apply in here, you think?
I think it does, especially the contempt.
Yeah.
Don't speak contemptuously to people. Why? Because they'll speak contemptuously about you. But I do want to keep it grounded in this text. So I would take it as part of this literary unit.
So you don't think he's
not,
being ironic when he says your pearls? He means literal, your highest goods, right? Or is there irony there? Is there
yeah, that's a
sarcasm?
good question. Are they
Yeah.
really pearls?
Right. Or is it
Or
sarcasm?
yes, or are they just what you think are
Yeah.
pearls, right? And I
Yeah.
don't know for sure. That's a
Yeah.
very good question. Either way, you think you're giving them something good, but if you don't, we think so. I always speak from the standpoint of the flaws of conservatives because I'm a
Yeah.
conservative. Okay,
Yeah.
so I don't want to play the victim here. So when I'm attacking the left,
Mhm.
I think I'm helping them. And
Yeah.
but usually I'm not, especially if I'm obsessed with them. So one of the things I noticed this principle, it used to be that we had a TV in our kitchen. Whenever time we went out for a cup of coffee, I would switch channels and I would just go back to the previous channel. So it was CNN and Fox News, back and forth. Every time I went in, I would just switch. It's a little bit like what's that treatment for PTSD?
Uh,
You know what I'm talking about? The thing with the eyes, you know, the body keeps score. It's a little bit like switching back and forth between those two lenses. And one of the things I noticed, especially in prime time, is that if you watch, what's his name, Brian Seltzer, a lot of on CNN, a lot of Brian Seltzer's show was footage from Tucker Carlson,
yeah.
and a lot of Tucker Carlson's show was footage from CNN. I was getting a lot of CNN by watching clips of CNN on Fox. And it's all about what do they think of us? They think that we're Nazis, right? And then over on the other side. So they're obsessed with each other.
Because they want to be loved. They want love from both.
Right. They want to fix. The left wants to fix us, and they think calling us deplorables, acting like we all want to like stand up and kill all the gay people, or have a revolution and make Trump our Hitler. They think that screaming that at us helps us.
But it seems like the right by and large is more openly desirous of the left's approval than the left is to the right. Do you think that's just in relationship to their power? You know, who has more? Yeah.
Yes, to both.
Yeah.
Right. They're the ruling class.
Yeah.
We're responding to them. They're not responding to us for the most part. So look.
So do they really want to fix us, or do they want? You know, I mean, I know there's some of them do, but yeah, through education, I guess. Yeah. If
they want to re-educate us. They think that's the way to fix us.
Yeah.
The way to fix us is to make us see things differently. And they think the way to do that is something like in Clockwork Orange, where our eyes are, kept open forcibly and we're force-fed their shock stuff about how evil we are. If we just watch one more thing about what we did to American Indians, or one more thing about white supremacy being part of every aspect of American society, or one more judgment of ourselves, finally we'll get the speck out and we'll see clearly and we'll realize how evil we are. And then we'll be fixed. Now, I don't mean like they want to fix us in the sense of they love us. They want to fix us in the sense of they want to remake us.
They want us to behave.
They want us to behave and think like them and be responsible. That's a way of dominating. Susan is saying from.
It's kind of like it's the way you treat a scapegoat. Like you kind of like you want you to be a good. We want you to be a good little
right. March
little
off,
serf. Good little serf. Behave yourself.
Go to the Aztec pyramid, praising Quetzalcoatl. And being thankful that you get in a couple of minutes you're going to get your heart ripped out. It's a privilege.
And then this little new authoritarians on the new right, I call them the little Caesars. They're like, you wait till I get my power and I'm going to show you what Caesar's like. And I always tell them, I'm like, don't do that, because everybody in between, they're going to just pick the guy who's got all the power, not the little Napoleon over there. You wait till I have power like FDR. I'll get you. It's like, come on, please, no.
Caesars, I call them the Caesarian section.
We're both Girardi fans, and we both came up with little Caesar names for them. That's awesome. You call them the Caesarian section?
Caesarian section, right? And they muse about how once we get the Christian Caesar, we're going to grab power, or once we get the Protestant Franco, we're going to grab power. Or what does the left do? The left said once we cancel enough people, then it's over. Like after the Obergefell decision, what everyone thinks about same-sex marriage, what I saw is that essentially at that point it is debate's over, shut up. And there's a local newspaper that their comments section forbade any criticism. It's settled law now. Right? Or they suppress anyone who's skeptical about climate alarmism. Or say so they're going to purge us. And then everything will be fine. Now, let's be honest, they don't really want to kill us. That might come later, because what Girard taught is eventually you go to Murderville, right? When this goes on. But I don't think that, Hillary Clinton would have taken power and then said, all right, F-15s, go level the South. I think they want to kill the old us, the deplorable self, and remake us through re-education into evolved people.
And what they don't understand is that the more they mock and persecute the aspects of the right that they hate the most, the more power it gets, because the cornerstone effect of Christ, the more the builder's rejected is perceived to be thrown away, the more it gains power. The more it's rejected, the more it gains power. And that is the inverted dismantling of traditional power politics that Christ has put in motion in history that you can't unwind. And they don't understand that.
You look at the political futures market. Trump pulled ahead when Alvin Bragg indicted him. And he only fell behind for a couple of hours after the conviction, because the left thought, that's it, it's over. We won. We will not. The Americans will not elect an opposition candidate who's a convicted felon. And you know what happened instead? Americans said, we will elect. We will not put back into power a party which turns its opposition candidates into convicted felons
right. Yeah.
and weaponizes the law.
Yeah.
So, since the day after that indictment, Trump has been leading in the probability market, and I think
Right.
he'll probably win on this.
Yeah.
And if the left really wants Trump to win, throw him in jail.
Yeah.
Make him,
Exactly. I keep telling you.
make
If
him
you
look
want to
like
become,
Mandela.
if you want to become a Nelson Mandela or figure, go ahead and keep putting them in
Exactly.
prison.
He
Put him
becomes
in solitary confinement. Put him in the boot and watch. You can't. He'll get
Yes.
bigger than ever. For the
Right.
rest
And
of your
then-
lives, you're going to hear about Trump. Well past his life if you put him in the boot for 2 weeks. You know what I mean?
Yep, he becomes Joan of Arc. He becomes Nelson Mandela.
But that's only it's only explainable within a Christian anthropological Christ-haunted framework of society. Nothing else makes sense as to why the more persecuted you become, the more powerful and attractive you are to society, whether you're right or wrong. Right? It's just irrespective of Trump's rightness or wrongness on doctrine. The more one is perceived to be an unfair scapegoat, the more power it gets. Because Christ, when he came to history, he played the outlaw. Christ played the outlaw to our conception of society, the human species, and our conception of what law is.
It's interesting. The only other person I ever heard say that, I was giving a sermon in a church with a lot of recovery people.
Yeah.
And I was talking about Jesus, and I was going to say he's an outsider, and I hesitated for a moment. I couldn't find quite the right word. And a young man who had just gotten into recovery kind of muttered outlaw. Like he vibed with Jesus the outlaw.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. As somebody who's essentially part of the dregs, right? Yeah. He was able to see Christ as the outlaw. Now, of course, Christ, he was accused of being an outlaw, but he was the most lawful man ever. Right.
Not in the spirit of the law of man. In the spirit of man's law, he was very much an outlaw.
Let me put it this way: he was a rebel against the God of this age.
Yeah.
But in terms of actually keeping the civil law, all the accusations are false.
Didn't he produce counterfeiting when he created those coins in those fishes' mouths? That's what I argue.
Well, I don't know.
I mean, come on.
I mean, maybe
even if it's $20 like George Floyd, that's counterfeiting. Think about it. I mean, seriously.
Well, unless he didn't create that stulture, unless it was already there.
But then that's finders keepers. That's not really a nice way to pay your taxes, is it? He should have given it back to the person it belonged to.
Well, and who was that? I mean, there's a lot going on there, right? We can pull it into our discourse, but
yeah, I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not
if we want to get deeper into that, he pulled a stulture out, right? And a stulture was 4 times the required tax.
Yeah.
Because they had from my book, they had a false weights and measures.
Yeah.
So you had to pay double, but also it's 4 times because it's an atonement tax and Jesus didn't sin. So Jesus doesn't own an atonement tax. Right. So he's really just required to pay Peter's tax, and he's paying 4 times what Peter actually owed. So there's a 4-fold restitution theme here, I think, going on. So
it's also a turning of the cheek type move, right? Or going the extra mile kind of move there.
It is. It's an extra mile move. So my point is that Jesus he was peaceable. They said, he said that we'd be counted among the brigands, but he wasn't. They said that he would have a revolution against Caesar,
right,
but he didn't. I mean, the actual law breaking he was accused of, I'm not talking about Pharisaical traditions. I'm talking about actual civil law. He wasn't a thief. He wasn't a murderer. He wasn't an insurrectionist. He was a resurrectionist, which is a completely different thing than an insurrectionist.
But again, the ultimate law of the kingdom of man is the scapegoat mechanism. And all of those laws, to the extent that they're good or wrong, are all window dressing for the ultimate law of sacrifice. And to that extent, not to be pedantic, but he was an outlaw. He rebelled against the system.
He rebelled against the scapegoat mechanism, right? So but he honored the catacomb. Is my point. You know what?
What?
The catacomb.
Okay.
So is that an? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, the catacomb.
Right, the catacomb. Right. So the catacomb is the restrainer.
Yeah.
In 2 Thessalonians.
He wasn't a flagrant. Yeah, what I mean by outlaw, he wasn't a flagrant, like childish kind of like disruptor of the catacombs letter of the law. He kept the letter of the law of it as it required. But I would say that he violated the spirit of the law, which is to maintain order and to not mix the boundaries of people's differentiation, not to put the prostitute with the tax, the tax rebel, and not to mix the leper
Right.
with the
I
clean and
think
all that.
I think he honored the aspects of the law which were genuinely catatonic.
Mhm.
So Girard would argue that that even though the state is created on a founding murder,
Mhm.
that legal procedures are anti-mimetic.
Mhm.
They slow down mobs, things like evidentiary procedures,
Yeah.
so we had an attempted lynching too, one against Jesus before, but another against in John 8, the woman taken in adultery. That's an attempted lynching.
Yeah.
So what does Jesus do? Jesus goes hyper legal. He starts appealing to the law of Moses, which says that witnesses have to be the ones to cast the first stone.
Yeah.
So he puts them into an evidentiary mode, right, and slows it down.
Yeah.
And you also had the law, I forget the Hebrew word, which is that you could not be a notorious sinner, especially guilty of the thing you were accusing someone of, in order to be a witness.
Yeah.
So Jesus is saying, oh, you want a trial? Well, this isn't a trial yet. Let's have a trial. Okay, I need witnesses who have not committed adultery to come forward, and you pick up a stone and you hurl it at her first. And that slowed down the mob.
Yeah.
So I think that Torah had an anti-mimetic aspect.
Right, for sure, yeah.
Right. So he's tapping into the anti-mimetic.
Mhm.
And Paul even does, like, what happens over and over again in Acts? They appeal to Rome. Now, Rome is founded on the murder of Remus by Romulus. But also, I think that Paul is arguing in Thessalonians. This will be a reach for some people, but I think the restrainer is the Emperor Claudius. Why? Because Claudius means restrainer to begin with, right? Because it's probably written when Claudius was emperor of Rome, and because, in fact, at that
his
time,
name means restrainer. Claudia, is that what you're saying?
Claudare is to restrain.
Okay.
He was given that name because he was lame. So in Latin, he was impaired, right? So they chose a name for him that focused on his restraint or his impairment. So restrain or impair is the root of his name. And you see over and over again, the Claudian Empire is rescuing Christians from the mob. And so they were restrainers, but it's all built on killing Remus.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But in God's providence, it actually has anti-mimetic elements to it. There's an equilibrium, but I think that Paul is saying, but that's going to go away, and then we need the kingdom of God.
Right.
Now, for Girard, that goes away at the end of history. Once the catacon is gone, it's over. But I would look at that from a more preterist point of view, and I'd say the catacon's basically gone. First century, and then the kingdom of God comes, and we could choose it at any time. And not be catacontic about it. One
more thing I wanted to point out here in the text. I was thinking about when it said, "Don't throw pearls before swine," and I thought, oh, that reminds me of what he threw at swine in the Bible, which were demons, and their name was Legion. So it tells you, pearls are associated with something of great price and of high value. The least valuable thing is Legion, this symbol of imperial might. And Jesus, in the next chapter over, it's Matthew 8, he's throwing the spirit of Legion, of the empire, into the herd to eat. It's so
funny. Instead of scapegoating the Romans, Jesus essentially scapegoats the demons.
Yeah.
Right? He doesn't cast
the whole spirit. He's scapegoating the whole spirit of scapegoating, right?
Precisely. Yeah. He's scapegoating the spirit of scapegoating. So what the Jewish nationalists wanted to do was to push the evil Romans out into the sea. Yeah. What Jesus does is push the evil out of the Romans and into the sea.
Right.
So I think you call that the personhood revolution.
Yeah.
That demoniac is essentially representing the Roman imperial order.
Right.
But they're persons. They're actual human persons. They're not the enemy. The enemy is the spirit that took hold of them. You could never kill enough Romans. And that's what the nationalists eventually did. They thought if we kill enough Romans, then it'll be okay. And what happened is, well, if you throw your pearls at the pigs, what will happen? If you try to kill the Romans, they may trample them under feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Exactly what happens 40 years later. Mm-hmm. You can't out-murder the Romans.
Right.
You can only out-forgive them.
Right.
And if you give them the distorted judgment, if you think just like they do, if your eyes are as distorted as their eyes because you're obsessed with what they think about you, you give them a measurement that they can use to destroy you. And if you give them some righteousness in this, it's not really food to them. They can't eat it. You've made it impossible. Just like when Peter cut off the ear of the servant of the high priest. Jesus heals the ear. What's going on there? There's literary stuff going on here. When we're violent and we cut off an ear, if I cut off your ear, what is that? What do you think that means figuratively?
You can't hear. You can't
exactly.
Hear.
So
and faith comes by hearing. So if you got
precisely. So if we cut off their ears, they can't hear us. And so Jesus is giving them more time. He's giving the temple guard another 40 years. All right, we're going to put your ear back on and give you a chance to listen. So if we give them judgment, if we give back to them the hate that they give to us, then that'll make them hungry and they'll tear us to pieces. And the pigs tore Israel to pieces. They showed up at Jerusalem with their boar. Well, it was mostly eagle, but also I think the 100th Legion had a boar insignia. So they showed up with their boar insignias and they literally tore people to pieces. They heard that Jews were swallowing gold and sneaking it out of Jerusalem, so they cut them open to find the gold, tearing them to pieces. That's what the cycle of mimetic rivalry and repaying evil with evil does. And if you stop doing that, you might actually be able to help them get the speck out of their eyes, but you will never get the speck out of their eye with the plank of hatred in your own.
Yeah, that's how you make a mountain out of a molehill. We don't want that.
So you go to the mirror, which is what James says is when somebody reads the royal law of Christ. What is the royal law of Christ? Well, it's the royal is kingly law. Well, when does he become king? On the cross. Do
you think that's what that mirror is referencing? Now we see through a glass darkly.
Yes, and I think specifically in James, which is very much about mimetic rivalry and exploding and accelerating violence, why are there wars amongst you, is you look in a mirror, he who looks into the royal law of Christ is like, and then looks therein, but doesn't see his own sin. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. If someone doesn't see their own sin, it's like someone who looks into a mirror and turns away and forgets what he looks like. So we need magnifying mirrors of our sin, not magnifying glasses. And people say, oh no, if you do that, we'll let them get away with it. And it's like, no, if we go after them, we'll let them get away with it. Because we'll be like them and we'll make them worse and they'll make us worse.
You can't defeat evil by violence. That's the whole point. It just becomes more powerful when you do.
The only way they don't get away with it is if they change. And the only chance we have of changing them is to not mirror back to them the worst of themselves.
Right. So true. And that's the spirit that we have to, I think that, the radical distortion of, again, the Western spirit that the reactionaries are reacting to is that, we have to, not use the mirror as a tool for a narcissist to be self-obsessed with self-flagellation as a form of social status in this kind of twisted way in which, look, all I do is look at all of my flaws and my racist flaws and my country's flaws and my class's flaws. And this obsession becomes this narcissist mirror instead of what it's supposed to be.
And when they're doing that, are they really even looking at a mirror at all? Or are they looking at a magnifying glass at somebody else? If I'm saying I have white privilege, what I'm really saying is I know that I have white privilege. Therefore, I don't really have it anymore. I'm good. And the people who aren't like me, who haven't acknowledged that they have white privilege, well, I can look down on them. That's one of the things when we talk to these companies, when they force this like toxic re-education camp, like diversity training, where you have white privilege or cis privilege or Christian privilege. I actually wrote a speech for one of our clients who said, really, is it privilege? If someone is forced to sit through that, how in the world can they be the privileged person? I mean, whoever it is that gets to lead the re-education camp and gets to compel someone else to go there is the person who actually has privilege. So if I have the power to say, go there and eat, take your medicine and admit that you have an ontological stain by being cisgendered, that you can never escape, admit that you have that privilege. Well, there's no greater evidence that you lack privilege and I have it than that.
Yeah, there's no one more privileged than Nurse Ratched in some ways in that story.
Yes. There's no one more privileged than the person who has the power to make you confess to your privilege.
Exactly. Well, Jerry, really appreciate your time, and this has been real fun and I think helpful for me and our audience. So I just want to let you have any last thought or anything you'd like to promote. Please share it with us.
I don't have anything I want to promote. I just, the last thought is detach from it. You really can. If social media is doing that, unfollow whoever it is that's obsessing you. I mean, maybe you can just ignore it. If you can't ignore it, unfollow it. That's cut out. If your eye offends thee, cut it out. Well, what to cut it out is to just not follow people who are driving you crazy. Just stop thinking about them.
Yeah.
Just think about solving the real problems of the world,
Right.
which are going to be, technological, commercial, scientific, medical.
Yeah.
Get focused on real problems, and just make the effort. Just redirect yourself every time you're tempted to get pulled into one of these things. Just look into the mirror, say, "Oh, I do the same thing." Okay, and then go on and do something productive. Spend time with somebody that you can really help, which is somebody who wants your help.
Yeah.
Maybe a family member, children, grandchildren.
And if you can't turn away from your aggression, you can always try to become a professional wrestler, and I'll be your manager and help you get it out in the ring.
You're gonna be my manager, huh? What's my wrestling name? What are you gonna?
That's you got to work. Are you the maker or the take? They had the Undertaker, so you got to be
Scary Jerry. How about that? Is rhyming. I don't watch wrestling, so would that work?
That works, yeah.
Yeah.
But I appreciate your time, Jerry. Thank you. And as always, it's great hearing from you. And we look forward to seeing what next projects you have in the works. So we'll keep following you. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Keep up the good work.